Podot.
Welcome to A Pod Too Far, the podcast for people who secretly know that they stopped making good war movies in 1980. Today, our subject is a film that had a limited impact at the time, but came to be seen as a stone-cold wartime classic. Went the Day Well. I'm Rob Hutton, and I've been living an apparently respectable life in this podcast for the past decade. But do I harbour a terrible secret? I'm joined by Duncan Weldon, a simple northern peasant who may have to kill me before the episode is over.
You know, your introductions are becoming more and more offensive over time.
I'm working on them.
Yeah. I think before we even start talking about this film, which is a fantastic film, and which has probably been the most requested film by people on Facebook and Twitter since we started.
So the most requested film is Where Eagles Dare, and I would say to everyone, we will do Where Eagles Dare. We're building up to Where Eagles Dare. The second most requested film
is the one we're talking about today, Went the Day Well. Now, before we talk about it at all, I want to apologise to all listeners, to give the caveat that Rob is obsessed with this film. Rob went down a rabbit hole of researching this film when he was writing his last book, much of which then ended up on the cutting room floor. I'm looking at him now. He's sort of ready, like a coiled spring, ready to go. This is a man who has been learning about this film, researching this film for 4 or 5 years now, and has not yet found an outlet for what he's learned.
Yeah.
You know, I can sort of feel the tap being about to be turned, and all of 5 years of frustration about to pour forth. So, Rob.
Yeah. So if we have any remaining listeners at this point, but actually, lots of people are obsessed with this film. Last night, I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, Gabriel Milland, and who has sort of helped me to explore my thinking on this. He's got a PhD in these sorts of areas. A shout out to other listeners, because it turns out we do have listeners. Shout out to Ray Turner. Hello, Ray. Glad you like it, if you're still listening. It's an odd film for me to be obsessed with. I don't know when I first saw it. I think it's one of those ones that I saw without being aware that I'd seen it in childhood. I think a lot of it will be familiar. But yes, I came across it when I was researching my last book, which was about British fascists in wartime Britain. And there's three films, the three Ealing films that sit together. There's one called The Foreman Went to France, which is basically now only available on YouTube. That one's never in the rotation. There's one called The Next of Kin, which you can find on DVD and was shown as a propaganda film into the 60s to national service troops and things. And there's this one, which even at Ealing, Michael Balcon, who's head of Ealing Studios, never talks about it in his memoirs. But this is the one that's lasted best, oddly.
Yeah, and I normally we don't give a brief recap of films, but just because I think although this is a classic and lots of people really, it's a very influential film, and lots of people that like the wartime cinema like it. This is the one that we've done so far, which may not be hugely familiar to everyone. So it's just worth giving us the 30-second version of what this film is.
The 30-second version of this film is that German paratroopers, disguised as Royal Engineers, have landed in the sleepy village of Bramley End, and their job is to set up a radio transmitter that will jam British radar ahead of the German invasion of Britain, which is going to take place on Monday.
Yes.
They land on the Saturday morning. They are discovered. Villagers realise who they are, and they're all herded into the church where the villagers are, where they're held hostage, and then gradually the villagers escape and essentially kill all the Germans.
Yes.
And if this sounds vaguely familiar to you, it's because it's sort of the plot of The Eagle Has Landed, which we will be doing next week as a sort of double bill with this episode. Now, one of the interesting things about this film is that it's set after the war has been won.
Yes.
It's made in 1942. It's released at the week of El Alamein, and towards the end of 1942. But it's set in a future in which the war is over.
And there has been a German invasion which has been repulsed.
Yes, and Britain has won. And I mean, it's just interesting that you make these choices in 1940. I suppose, your feeling is, well, if it goes the other way, no one's going to be watching this anyway.
Yes.
It's incredibly English.
Oh, yeah, but just step back for a second. I mean, forget about the propaganda aspects, the writing of it. I'm sure you'll want to talk about Graham Greene in a moment. But just stepping back as a film, the two things that really struck me when I watched it again, maybe the third time I've seen it, when I watched it again for this, was that opening, the village. It's the perfect, idyllic, English, home counties village.
Do you know the name of the actual village?
No.
It's called Turville in Buckinghamshire, and it's where The Vicar of Dibley was filmed.
There we go.
This is basically Nazis come to Dibley.
That's exactly what it is. This is a perfect...
Nazis come to Dibley, kill Dawn French.
Yes.
And...
But so the first thing is, it's just this, the location scouts had done their job well. They've found the perfect English village with the perfect characters and the postmistress and all the vicar, all of this sort of perfect, idyllic, rural English life. And then the violence in this film, for a film made in the 1940s, it's a violent film. It's like people being killed with hatchets, but it's closer. It's not lots of blood and gore like you'd get in a 90s film or an 80s film, or whatever. But it is.
It is Tarantino-esque
yes.
in its violence for the time. And actually, my DVD of it opens with the adult certificate. Although I think one reviewer said this would be a good family outing. But older children, I guess.
But you say Tarantino, and it feels almost Tarantino in that it's that sort of contrast between perfect idyllic English village, visceral violence occurring around it. That's a bit of cinema.
We will get to the viscerality of the violence. As you say, this film has this odd afterlife in which it's unacknowledged as the inspiration for The Eagle Has Landed, but it has a sort of odd past life as well. It says at the start of it, it's based on a story by Graham Greene, which is a short story by Graham Greene called The Lieutenant Died Last, which is published in Harper's Weekly, and which is quite hard to get hold of. I have got hold of it because, as you say, I went down a research rabbit hole. I don't actually think I mentioned this film in the book. I think the editor made me take it out. He just said, you've become obsessed. I will put the Graham Greene story on our Facebook page. That's how we're going to do DVD extras for this podcast. So go there, search for A Pod Too Far on Facebook, and if you want to read the story, it's quite short.
I'm probably going to do that this evening.
Yes, right. It's a Graham Greene story. It's quite dark.
Yeah.
In the Graham Greene story, it's not set in an idyllic bit of England. It's set in sort of Metroland.
Yeah.
I think that's how he describes it.
Yeah.
They are all. I think they are. The villagers are all held hostage in the church, but it's not a nice old Norman church. It's a sort of tin roof Methodist chapel, and it's the poacher. It's a poacher who Bill Purvis, who sees them off. Who's sort of this kind of senile figure who maybe thinks he's fighting the Boers. Yeah. It's sort of, but knows that there's something wrong with these paratroopers who've landed. I think they've landed to sabotage the railway or something. And this was written in 1940, I think. So at a point at which it was really plausible that might happen. Yeah. And he sees them off with his double barrel shotgun, partly because he accidentally shoots their explosives. Yeah. And actually, it's mainly about how affected he feels, because he sort of, after he's beaten them, he creeps up to have a look, and the lieutenant, who's a young man, is still alive, and Purvis, the poacher, finishes him off as he would as sort of a wounded rabbit. Yeah. As an act.
This is a very Graham Greene story.
This is a very Graham Greene story. None of this is in the film. Yeah. And keeps a photograph that the lieutenant had of a baby, and that's the one thing he won't show anyone when they come to see him, because he feels this odd sense of guilt about what he's done. It's a minor Graham Greene work, and not much of that makes it into this film, except Bill Purvis. Except there is a Bill Purvis poacher in this who has a influential role. He didn't survive to The Eagle Has Landed, sadly. It is a people's war.
Oh, yeah,
film.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about this is that the villagers, you've got this sort of a perfect cast of, you've got a publican, you've got a village policeman, they're all in the home guard together, and that's very jolly. And it's the villagers who finish off the Germans
But
themselves.
they don't need the army. They're trying to contact. This is the villagers resisting, men and women.
Yes.
Yeah.
When the film comes out, one of the part of the critical reception, mixed critical reception, part of the critical reception is, well, nobody thinks the Germans are going to invade now. It's slightly 2 years too late, this film. This is the point at which people are talking about a second front. And indeed, actually, as it comes out after sort of, as I say, the week of El Alamein, it comes out at a point at which Britain is starting
the
to
tide
think,
has turned on.
Okay, we sort of know how this is going to go.
Yeah.
But which perhaps actually that bothers us less watching it now.
Yes, because
we've
it's all a very long time ago.
Yeah, there is Cavalcanti, the director, is Brazilian, Portuguese. He's sort of all over. He's come from a documentary style. There's really interesting write-ups of his involvement in this. He didn't seem to be terribly interested in the actors, and not terribly interested in the editing either. But the person who edited it sort of said, "Well, I knew what he wanted, so I just got on with it." It's Cavalcanti was quite left-wing. A lot of people at Ealing were quite left-wing. It's an interestingly left-wing film. This,
and where does it sit, sort of within sort of officialdom, as it were? Is this is not a film made at the government's request?
No, they get help.
Yes,
because you're not going to be able to film soldiers running around the English countryside without government help. And one of the writers had this line. She said there was always someone from the ministry around, and we sort of thought that they were supposed to be advising on military matters, but it was never quite clear what they were doing. But there doesn't seem to have been heavy-handed kind of. No. It's not. So far as anyone can tell, it's not like someone from the ministry said we need a film about how to kill a German in your back garden.
Yes.
And there were a few films that were made like that.
Yeah.
At the start of the war, but this is Ealing Studios sort of telling the story that they want to tell.
Yeah, but you go back to that point. It's quite a left-wing film in many ways. It is. So the baddie is sort of like the local sort of squire figure who is a secret Nazi.
Yes, it's fantastic. So he in the original script, he's a German sleeper agent.
Yeah.
So he'd been sent over, and he's been living. I mean, basically, we always think of him as the squire. He's not a squire. He's just a member of the idle rich.
Yeah.
And he's obviously a cad. And we can see when we first see him, he's leading the vicar's daughter along, who's not quite an elderly spinster, but she's obviously worried that she's on the shelf, and she sees this chap as the one person who might rescue her, and we can tell, I think, that he's leading her on, and that this is never going to go anywhere.
He's clearly a wrong-un straight away.
Yeah, he's a cad. Yeah. He ought to either marry her or stop flirting with her.
Yeah.
But in fact, in the shooting script, he's a sleeper agent. They cut that, which in fact makes it work much better, because then he's just a posh fascist.
Yes.
and the thing that we know now is actually the extent to which.
There were quite a few posh fascists.
There were quite a few posh fascists, and there were quite a few sort of ordinary people. I mean, this is my book is about. There were ordinary people who did want Hitler to win, and were actually willing to sort of to do things to help.
Yeah.
Had they been in touch with Berlin rather than, as my book reveals, MI5, that was their tragedy. But it's quite. It's interesting comparing it to something like In Which We Serve, where the women are very domestic and it's all hearth and home.
Yeah.
The women in this all have jobs.
Yeah.
I think only the lady of the manor doesn't have a job, and her job is being the lady of the manor.
Yeah, but it's essentially a full-time job.
Yeah. So she's busy organising. She is the most.
Those flowers aren't going to arrange themselves, Rob.
Well, but she's organising the billeting.
Yeah,
and and very sensible about that. And I mean, there is class in this, and you can't make a film about an English village in 1942 without having class in it.
No,
but there is incredible sort of subversion of class. The first thing is that the posh man who they all keep going to for leadership,
Yeah.
plausibly as they would, is actually working for the other side.
Yes.
And they will not be able to free themselves until they've got rid of him.
Yeah.
And the lady of the manor is off. You know, perhaps had she been held in the village, she might have organised them. But she's in the manor with the evacuee children. So it will have to be the ordinary men and women,
Yeah, sort of stepping up to sort of save the village and save
who will rise up to save the nation.
Yeah.
And the women will play their full part.
Yeah.
So the women, and there's a postmistress, there's a the milkmaids.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting take.
Yeah.
And looking ahead slightly, possibly to Best Death, but basically there's a Simon Heffer essay about this on my DVD, and I will try and source that somewhere else for people, about all the sort of the class elements of this. But his argument is that basically the ruling classes only redeem themselves in this when the lady of the manor sees a hand grenade land at the German hand grenade land at the feet of the evacuee children, and picks it up and walks out of the room.
Yes,
that's the moment at which it's, you know, okay. The posh people who were supposed to be leading the village and have basically fallen down on the job.
But as long as you blow yourself up in sacrifice,
you get
a bit of redemption.
You get it back. Yeah. So, but I learn, interesting, she wasn't supposed to die in the original script. She doesn't die. It's Thora Hird.
Oh, really?
Who is the milkmaid, and we will talk more about Thora Hird being in this.
Yeah.
Thora Hird was supposed to die. At some point in filming this, they decided it would be better if she died. I find this really interesting about the creative sort of nature of films, where you find out that an absolutely key moment in the film, they only thought of it on the day, or it happened by accident. It's a bit like Indiana Jones, you know, only shooting the guy with the sword because Harrison Ford was sick with dysentery and couldn't face a sword fight. And it's like, but that's the best bit.
Yeah.
And you just stumbled on it.
Well, it's just the process of filmmaking, though. You know, it's different to writing a novel. You know, you write a novel, you finish the novel is done. Whereas you write your script, you turn up, there are actors, there are directors, you spot new things, you know, things evolve.
It's an odd title as well, Went the Day Well. It may have been less odd then. Apparently, this is a poem. It's from a poem.
It's one of the First World War poems
that appears on a lot of war memorials.
Okay, yeah.
It's an odd poem. It's an odd title. It was not the title for most of the sort of the writing of it. It was going to be called They Came in Khaki.
Okay.
And they decided that was a terrible title. Would you like to hear some of the other titles?
Oh, go yes, please.
Somewhere in England, Incident at Easter, Backwater Battle, Warm Welcome. Off the map, right off the map. You sense that the brainstorming session was getting quite desperate at Ealing at this point. Heart of the country, 0 hour, the bells rang. That Saturday morning, Black Sunday. And in the United States, it wasn't released as Went the Day Well. It was released as 48 Hours.
Which is not a bad title.
It's not a bad title, no. I mean, somebody
also,
should make...
Somewhere in England is not a bad title either.
Somewhere in England is not a bad title. I don't think that Went the Day Well is a great title either. No. But let's go to the after action report. Quick, Dad, they're in the cable car. What's the moment that you want to start watching this film if you're not going to watch all of it?
That's a good question. I think it's quite early, actually. I think the moment you've got the moment you realise what's happening with the moment you everyone's in the village. You have the church. As the drama starts.
The drama starts more or less at the moment at which Nora realises that Nora, the vicar's daughter, realises that these are Germans.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a sort of. I mean, it's only a 90-minute film, so it's not. So saying the second hour.
Yeah.
It's sort of. Yeah. That you could probably come in, you know, in the first. Skip the first
you could watch an episode of The Vicar of Dibley for 30 minutes to build the scene.
Imagine which of the characters, which of the characters is a secret Nazi spy.
You know who would be in The Vicar of Dibley. Anyway,
certainly by the time that George, the young evacuee boy, is making his dash, it's proper exciting. But Cooler King Award for the most gratuitous American character. There are no American characters. No, they're not in the war.
But this is interesting. It seems when gratuitous American characters appear to be a post-war invention.
Yes.
Because I guess during the war, you're making films for a very British audience, and it's only afterwards that you start thinking, can we sell this?
Yeah, they won't watch this in Hollywood if it doesn't have an American in it. Which we will come back to when we talk about The Eagle Has Landed. But movie body count, I have a confession to make, which is I have not counted how many people.
Neither have I. Often when we watch these things, if it's a film where below 100, I will just keep a tally count.
I think I'm going to get one of those little clickers that they have at nightclubs, so I can just click people off every time they get killed. But no, so I don't have a body count. I can't find one on the internet. I mean, if any of our army of loyal listeners want to sit through it counting, maybe if you haven't seen the film, I recommend the film and sit there with a clipboard. And introducing actors who are introduced in this film.
Well, there is an obvious one, isn't there? There's a really, really obvious one. It's Thora Hird. Thora Hird killing Nazis.
Young Thora Hird. I think it's really interesting, young Thora Hird, actually, because she is, because you sort of see what she looked like before, 40 years before she was in Last of Some Wine. And B, there are two milkmaids. The other one is played by Elizabeth Allen, who she was going to be a leading lady in Hollywood, and then she keeps getting passed over for roles, but she's a classic screen beauty. But actually, Thora Hird is the one that you remember.
Yeah.
Just there is something there that's just like, oh right, actually she's got something to her. I love the bit where she's obviously thinking about having it away with the Nazi before she knows he's a Nazi. You come and sit here. So sort of. Small role that she absolutely made her own.
And this was her first film, wasn't it?
Not quite her first film. She's in. I know that she's in The Next of Kin as a lorry driver. She's sort of been in bits, but I think this is the moment at which people sort of say, "Oh, we can do more with her." Yeah. I mean, there's this interesting thing about Ealing that a lot of the casting of this. Almost all the involvement in this, it seems to be sort of who's available. I mean, it's a British studio, and the credits on Ealing films aren't always reliable. Sort of people get credited for things that they said, I have no memory of writing that, and other people are sort of called in. One of the female screenwriters on this, or one female screenwriter on this, was sort of called in to do they said, we need character here. Two other people had scripted the action, and they realised that. And actually, it's the characters that make this.
Yeah,
because you do feel. I mean, again, like all these things, they could be a stereotype. It's like, oh well, there'll be a baker, and there'll be a postmistress, and there'll be a if you look on IMDb, it just says writing credits and others. Diana Morgan. Diana Morgan is the person who is generally sort of credited with having, as it were, fleshed out the characters, which really matters. There's at the moment where the postmistress, just before her big scene, is talking to the soldier, and she's sort of saying, "Oh well, we never had children, and I blame Mr. Collins, and he blamed me," and then and you just think, okay, well that's two lines of dialogue, but suddenly you've got a whole life there.
Yeah,
brilliant.
This is the thing. We've built this in the film. We've built up this perfect English village. We know who the people that live there are, and then there are Nazis, violence, and that's it. In some ways, this is going to sound mad compared to your theories. This, in some ways, reminds me of sort of 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s American slasher horror films, where you start with idyllic location, and then you introduce horrific violence. So you look at those Kevin Smith movies like Scream, whatever. It's what people just having a nice time. We get to know them for a bit. Oh no, there's a murderer.
We get to see who has sinned and must therefore face justice.
We learn who the people are.
Yeah.
We get an impression of their lives, and then suddenly there's like external shock comes. In this case, it's Nazi paratroopers.
Yeah, no, actually, I completely see that.
And then the people have to fight back against the
I mean, let's talk about the women in this film. There are loads of women in this film.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, I don't want to throw forward too much to The Eagle Has Landed, but actually there are more women in this film made in 1942 than there are really in The Eagle Has Landed, which is made in the 70s, a theoretically more, of after women's lib and everything. Actually, the women in that are much less interesting than the women in this. The women in this are more interesting than in Which We Serve. They all have proper jobs.
Yeah.
They will all take their part in fighting. I mean, actually, so the men are, obviously one of the men is a secret Nazi. A lot of the other men are Nazis, but all of the women in this are great roles.
Yeah. Completely.
Best death. Lot of competition for this.
Yes, there's a lot.
Can we have best killing of a German?
Hatchet.
Yeah, hatchet. So
Postmistress with the hatchet.
Postmistress. Actually, so my wife was watching over my shoulder and was like, I can't believe they made this. There is no splatter, there is no gore, but just partly because we have been given this woman as one kind of person.
Yeah.
That she's a scatty postmistress.
Sad she didn't have children, etc. Yeah.
Quite maternal.
Yeah.
We see her. We see her sort of defending one of the children from a nasty Nazi.
Yeah.
There's no warning that this is coming.
No.
I thought maybe she was going to poison the sausages or something.
Yeah.
That as it were, she was going to.
Yeah.
That she was going to kill him in a woman's way.
Yes.
If you see what I mean. There was going to be some cunning thing where we discovered that she put rat poison on the sausages she's feeding. No, she picks up an axe.
An axe. Going back to my 1980s slasher movie.
And with no warning. Yeah. And then she's bayoneted.
Yeah.
Moments later, the whole thing. And in between, there's you have the women. She's trying to phone through.
Yes, for help. Yes. So she's hatcheted. She's bought herself some time. She's got the phone.
She's
and
only got
phone.
minutes. And the women at the other end of the exchange
see the light
not
go
listening.
on. Yeah, they see the light go on, but they don't.
Oh, I'm not gonna take her call. Oh,
yeah.
and it's such an interesting
and then
moment.
She gets
they're just dismissing her, and she's just done this heroic thing.
Yeah.
And now she's killed.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably the best killing of a Nazi. I quite like Mervyn John's clipping the cable so that the heavyweight falls on the Nazi's head. That's also
good. Yeah,
also
it's like cartoon feel to it almost. But there's no.
Nora, the vicar's daughter, killing Oliver Wilsford at the end. I mean, that's reckoned to be. It's reckoned that there are two scenes in this that people who've seen it remember, and she's in both of them.
Yeah.
It's her realizing that the chocolate bar is German, and her shooting the man that she loved.
Yeah.
All of which is done. And the others don't even notice that she's done this. We never see them sort of finding the squire's body.
Yeah.
And it's not even clear what's happened to her at the end of this. Basically, that's her last scene.
Yeah.
Is her pumping him full of lead. But that could be in a film noir sort of.
Yeah.
You could have that in an American 30s film with Humphrey Bogart or something. Best death. So, I mean,
where are you going?
I think we end up giving it to the postmistress.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just that little sequence of unexpected axe murder, calling for help, being ignored, bayoneted, and it's just a few moments, but it's because of that earlier script doctrine we were talking about.
Yeah.
That, we've just had a few lines of just we feel we know her better. We know a bit about her life history. We know. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We also you even get it with the girls on the telephone exchange not wanting to take her call.
Yeah.
You know what kind of person she is, if you see what I mean, and you have some sympathy. You're not blaming her. Sort of, we have seen that she may not be the most efficient postmistress in England at this point. Best meme. Good luck. Best meme. I think Nora realizing that the chocolate bar is German.
Yes.
That's German for Vienna. What my Twitter feed in years to come is going to be extremely odd allusions to the films that almost, it's already a bit like that, frankly.
But at least you have the Twitter feed, so you don't have to do it at home.
Yes. No one at home understanding this. Stiffest upper lip.
There are stiff upper lips, and you tell your nominations, but I think this isn't this isn't a stiff upper lip film.
No.
This is a people's war film. This is a everyone coming together to resist. You know, it's a different type of sort of
there isn't a
stereotypical
lot
British
of
character.
time for sitting around. I mean, I did write down chap who realizes his son was killed in the Home Guard, but you know, but not, yeah.
It's not like that film. This is a film which focuses on a different part of Britain's war.
Yes, yeah. The point is to get out there and kill them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, and they will kill them. It's
Yeah.
a very violent film,
Yeah.
right? Nastiest Nazi. Well, I mean,
It's the Squire.
yes. Except the Nazi lieutenant who announces they're going to go and kill 5 children tomorrow morning.
Yes,
It's
okay.
a strong
yeah,
bid.
strong bid for Nasty's Nasty then. Oh, yeah.
All of the Nazis in this
Yeah.
are pretty horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, fair enough.
Which is why, you know, you kill them with a hatchet or whatever, or dropping
Yes.
heavy film. You know, it's not. Yeah.
Yeah, it is made absolutely. I mean, you even with that the chap who's killed with a hatchet, we get a little slice of his life. You know, we know that we learn that he has children and so on. But yes, broadly, you know, from the moment they shoot the vicar, it's absolutely clear that these guys are not nice.
Which is very different to, or not very different, but you know, the Graham Greene story.
Yes.
Whereas, you know, ending with some almost sympathy that we've had to do this to kill these Germans.
Yeah.
Whereas here it's, you know, set them up very explicitly as obviously bad guys.
Yes, yeah.
Kill
So
them.
the Graham Greene story is, you know, it's a not particularly lovely part of England. You can tell that Graham Greene does not like this part of England. It's not a particularly lovely part of England, and it sort of has to be slightly regretfully saved.
Yeah.
You know, this is. Oh my goodness, this is the most beautiful part of England. You don't believe that this exists.
Yeah.
It's so lovely, and these people are absolutely awful, and they must be stopped.
Yeah.
The Dam Busters Dog Prize for the most problematic moment. I didn't have anything. You know, normally with these, there's some moment where you might say to any child passing through the room, we don't use that word anymore.
Yeah.
Well, okay, there is a derogatory term used of the Italians.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know,
Not on a Dam Busters level, though.
it's not on a Dam Busters level. No. Loose Lips. The best lines. I mean, the one I've got is Mervyn John's right at the start. They wanted England, these Germans did, and this is the only bit they got. He says, standing on their graves.
Yes.
Which is sort of, it's an interesting inversion of Rupert Brooke and
Foreign Field.
Foreign Field. Yeah, this is their Foreign Field.
Yeah.
It's not a great line in and of itself, but the moment where the woman says, "We're going to give the Germans a bit of their own back," which is said, that's what she's saying, but the shot is of a child sleeping.
Yes.
Which is just kind of, I suppose the point is that this is just after the villagers are stirred into action ultimately because the Nazis have said, we are going to shoot 5 of your children tomorrow morning. And at that point it's right. Okay, well, we can't wait for help anymore. I mean, all sorts of things about this film don't work. There's a lovely review line when it came out that I can't immediately grab, but that said this film has all kinds of problems, none of which matter, which is the review that we all want. Yeah. You know, there's sort of there is an attempt to build tension with other messages to, you know, where they're trying. Thora Hird tries to get a message out of the village. The Lady of the Manor tries to get a message out of the village. Both of which thwarted by the same sort of oblivious cousin who is somehow allowed to drive through this village, sit and have tea, and leave because they can tell that she's never noticed that it's under the Nazi jackboot. but none of that's terribly well done. Yeah. You know, and you can imagine, I mean, Hitchcock had at this stage shown how you can build tension in a film and this kind of thing, but they don't really bother with that. Cavalcanti wasn't interested in that or didn't know how to do it, and instead it's all basically from the moment that they say, well, we're going to kill children, that it's like, right, well, you know, we must now rise up. Broadsword Radio. What's completely implausible about this?
Well, just the entire German operation by the time the film is made. But, you know, we can skirt over that.
Actually, even leaving aside by the time, what, they've come to this village because they've got some kind of radio device,
it
which, by
doesn't
the way,
feel-
they have brought in by parachute.
Yes, and the village isn't quite near the coast, and
Yeah.
why our big invasion is coming in 48 hours' time. Better drop off a very small, unsupported party of men really far away. Hopefully that
Yes.
won't give the game away.
With a large piece of equipment that presumably requires power, that means that they have to operate it from a village. The whole MacGuffin for why they're there doesn't really work.
No.
Ultimately, but that's fine. But to be honest, they've stopped caring about that an hour into the film. So why should we? Judgment at Nuremberg. How many war crimes are committed in this film? Have we established whether it's a war crime to drop in somebody else's uniform? I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you can certainly be shot as a spy at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, let's threatening to kill the children. I mean, so again, open and shut, really. Isn't it?
So, okay.
Shooting the vicar.
Yeah.
I mean, there's quite a few war crimes.
Duncan, is this the operation that changed the course of World War II?
No. No. We can move swiftly on.
Okay. Is this worth dying for? Does this film stand up?
It does.
I obviously think it does.
You obviously do. Now, I was less excited about watching this film because, I've seen it a couple of times before this. I agreed to do it because you really wanted to, and because many people have requested it. But having watched it, it's not my favorite film. It's not even my favorite film made during the war, but it is an entertaining 90 minutes, and it's an interesting 90 minutes.
I think that's
as well,
the thing. I don't think it's the best
about
film made in the war, and I don't think it's my favourite film made in the war. But I just think there's so much going on that is so interesting, and the characters are so interesting, and I think that's what ultimately holds me with it. They wanted this podcast, the Germans did, and this is the only bit of it that they got. Thanks for listening. That was A Pod Too Far with me, Robert Hutton, and Duncan Weldon. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe, and if you liked it, rate and review us. You can drop us a line at podtoofar@gmail.com or on Twitter at podtoofar. If you want to watch along with us, next week, the Eagle has landed.